Decision-making process. Decision-making is essential in a company, so much so that it caught the attention of researchers. Managers are at the heart of this topic as they must make decisions on a daily basis. These decisions are more or less determinate and important, therefore, it seems relevant to wonder about the circumstances in which they are made. Everyday decisions do not require the same resources, information and autonomy as strategic decisions. This is the reason why we will focus on the managerial perspective of the decision-making process in companies. Besides, social psychology has also largely focused on this topic, but the approach of researchers is a little different. Organizational theory and management tries to control as much as possible the organizational factors and the direction of decisions, in addition to understanding the exact moment when an individual makes a decision. Social psychology, for that matter, focuses on the very process of decision-making, that is to say the way the environment impacts directly on the individuals and the quality of the decision. Social psychology's goal is oriented towards the following question: how to obtain the best possible decision. For this reason, we studied in this chapter the theories of decision-making within groups, in both social psychology and management. Thus, it seemed compelling to analyze this process, which is common to both fields, and to try to comprehend the differences and similarities. We will first give the details of the frame of our two-sided approach by introducing the decisional context that we chose. Indeed, the field of decision-making processes is huge, so we chose to focus especially on strategic decisions that are made in groups. Then we will browse the major factors that influence decisions according to the organizational theory approach and to social psychology theories. Later in this chapter, we will address different ways to find a way out of an already made decision, and how to get out of the commitment that was made with the initial decision-making. The different contexts of decision-making. In his work, Igor Ansoff distinguishes three types of decisions: strategic decisions, tactical or administrative decisions, and operating decisions. Regarding strategic decisions, one has to think in the long term because the company must mobilize its resources to make as much profit as possible. First, two major and rather global, though essential, questions must be answered: what must be produced? And which means must be used to get it done? These questions will allow us to comprehend the integration of the company within a given environment in order to build its reputation on the market. Secondly, tactical or administrative decisions will ensue from the first strategic decisions that are made on a more general level. Once we got at the heart of the matter, we will have to study the way that resources can be used to reach the goals that were previously defined and are now very specific. To do so, the material, human, financial and technological resources of the company will be collected and listed to optimize their use. Finally, when we take a closer look at the different types of decision-making of a company, we find the operating decision-making. These decisions are actually applied in the everyday management of the company, and when resources have been identified, they are used in the best possible way in order to make maximum profit. For example, these operating decisions include activities like a good inventory management or production management. While presenting this, we will linger especially over the first type of decision, strategic decisions. We will try to analyze, in a first part, in which context a decision is made through the perspective of management theories. Then, in a second part, we will fuel our thoughts by bringing the point of view of social psychology. The theory of decision-making. Decision-making or problem-solving covers different aspects of one behavior. Indeed, it can mean, first of all, acknowledging the presence of a problem, secondly, looking for possible already existing solutions in our environment or drawing up more creative and innovating solutions. Then, the choice is made. Finally, the selected solution is implemented through the application of an action plan. The response of an individual who is confronted with a situation in which a choice has to be made is always an action or a behavior, including the decision to do nothing. In his 1947 work, Administrative behavior. Simon describes in an even more subtle way the different types of decisions which are made in different contexts and for different purposes. It is important to specify that, according to the author, decision-making is a rational process, but Herbert Simon mentions the idea of a limited rationality under which he puts the decision that is made objectively or subjectively, consciously or unconsciously. Before giving any further detail, let's ask ourselves what limited rationality means. The author begins his demonstration with the following statement: humans have irrational behavior, but their rationality is limited in terms of cognitive ability and especially in terms of available information in their environment. It would take them too much time to take into account and analyze all available elements, supposing that they could have access to all of them. So, generally speaking, the economic man often settles on his first choice, which he thinks is satisfying enough. Thus, Herbert Simon, Gergen and Gergen, 2004, define the objectively rational decision as follows: it derives from an action or behavior aiming at optimizing the values given in a specific situation. Moreover, a decision is subjectively rational when it maximizes the chances to achieve a given goal according to the actual knowledge of the individual. Simon also mentioned the consciously rational decision that comes from a conscious process of adapting the means to the end. Here, the individual shows purposiveness when the adaptation is made intentionally. The rational decision is supposed to complete, or at least to favor, the goals of the organization. From the individual's point of view, it is a personally rational decision which corresponds to the intentions of the individual. To come to these different types of decisions, Simon explained how the process works and how to make one or another decision. First, for this process to work, the individual must consider every possible solution, evaluate the consequences of each solution, and assess separately the different groups of consequences. In order to make a decision, the individual must be able to choose among different behaviors or different actions available in the environment. According to this author, a decision that is made by one decision maker in a specific context cannot be transferred and applied to other circumstances. As for Mintzberg, he used this principle to develop even more the different stages of the process. He described the first stage as a stage of identification. In other words, the individual acknowledges the necessity to make a decision and the opportunity to make a choice. Through stimuli, the individual will be able to identify the necessity to make a decision, and when a certain threshold has been reached, the second stage begins. The individual must then take into account every piece of information available in his environment to clarify and define the problem accurately. As Simon specified it, there are two sub-stages which describe the individual in two situations. First, the individual has a passive behavior since he is looking for ready-to-use solutions. However, subsequently, the individual is much more active and creative since he is going to modify these solutions. Finally, we can notice that the management theories, which were put forward by the authors previously mentioned, focus on the cognitive aspect of decision-making and how the information available are handled. Social psychology can show us a new perspective on this complex process which often involves several members in a group. Thus, one has to take into consideration every member, every character, and understands how the group works in order to try to establish the ideal conditions to favor interactions. The psychology factor. Social psychology is a discipline in which human interactions and their psychological foundations are studied in a systematic manner. What is being studied is the group and is defined, for example, by McDavid and Harari in 1968 as an organized system of two or more individuals who are interrelated so that the system performs a function, has a standard set of roles relationships among its members, and has a set of norms that regulate the function of the group and each of its members. The interest of studying the process of decision-making in social psychology lies in understanding how it works in order to improve the conditions in which a choice is made. Indeed, it has often been noticed that the decisions made in a group are not satisfying. This is a quite complicated process since one has to take into consideration the character of each member and the social relationships. This process has real strengths because it operates within a community since it gives, among other things, a better place to information through the plurality of points of view, and can also favor a better appropriation of the decision if everyone has taken part in its implementation. Nonetheless, decision-making in a group can also show disadvantages in terms of time, since the more members there are, the longer the process can be. Besides, a phenomenon of influence can appear. Some might try to exert their power on the rest of the group and give a different orientation to the final decision. In Simon's theory of limited rationality, individuals are rational and manage to make decisions in order to maximize gains and minimize costs. In social psychology, Janis shared the same point of view on the fact that the individuals who take part in the decision-making process are all reasonable and have rational behavior. He assured that the decision of a group is often less relevant than a decision made by each member individually. Then, here is the paradox: how to explain that rational individuals make a decision that is not rational? The author justified this through the existence of a groupthink phenomenon and asserted that everything happens as if friendship, solidarity, and the group spirit that exist in communities encourage them to adopt a non-critical groupthink at the cost of an independent and analytical thinking. Individuals will head towards an alternative solution which appears like a compromise. This corresponds to the creation of a rather passive response from the individuals, as mentioned by Simon. Secondly, Simon stated that individuals will try to overcome this already existing solution and be more creative and innovative. The ideas of each member are worth considering and show their will to be active in their search for information in order to make a final decision. However, we cannot give up studying this process in a group, because the fact that a person makes a choice all alone does not allow us to predict and comprehend decision-making in a group. Then, it is important to understand how collective decisions are made. Which phenomena can explain the function of a group when its members have to make a choice in particular circumstances? Moreover, standardization, or on the contrary polarization, will be introduced afterwards. These phenomena can justify Janus groupthink, which leads individuals to a compromise, but is not necessarily the best way to make a decision. Factors influencing decision-making. The managerial approach. March and Simon, in 2003, as part of a research in cognitive psychology, described one-time behaviors as interactions between the internal state of the individual at the moment T and the stimuli that the individual receives from the environment. The internal state is the result of the individual's life story, which is a combination of learnings and experiences, in other words, the conscious and unconscious memory. According to these two authors, behaviors are influenced by the learnings contained in the memory, and by stimuli in the environment which lead to specific actions from the individual. This stimulus behavior phenomenon is called a recall. Then, it would be possible to have an influence on people's behaviors by using the recall phenomenon, that is to say, to trigger stimuli which activate behaviors in the memory which have been learned beforehand. Activating these learnings, however, is not just a simple action and reaction process. Decisions also depend on values and goals that are determined while considering possible actions, the consequences of these actions, in terms of belief, perceptions and expectations, as well as the different possible courses of action. One stimulus can activate a more or less large part of the memory. Therefore, all consequences cannot be anticipated. If we consider all these aspects of decision-making, Rojo, 2003, highlighted that an organization can partially control three factors that influence the individual. These factors are the alternatives that the individual considers when making a decision, in addition to their consequences and the individual's goals. The organization can have an influence on decisions and control their parameters in many ways. Thus, Rojo gives us several approaches in his work. Influencing the goals. One has to be careful at the time of recruitment and make sure to hire employees who possess values that are in accordance with the goals of the company from the beginning. Then, members who will have to make decisions later on will make them in the interest of the company. It is important for the company to show a clear image in order to attract good people, through insisting on sharing values with applicants, with regard to their skills. In the life of the company, a system of rewards and sanctions can be established. They can be material or immaterial and encourage employees to behave in accordance with the company's policy and goals. Another way to ensure that the company's values are shared is the on-the-job training. In this way, the individual learns, for example, how to make decisions in line with the company's expectations, in addition to guaranteeing loyalty and identification with the company. Control of the decision's parameters. Beyond influencing the purpose of the decisions, it is possible to limit the thinking frame of the individuals and therefore, force them to only use the organization's references. One of the main elements of control focuses on the structure of the company. Based on Perot's works, 1986, Rojo indicated that there are 4 essential factors. The first one corresponds to the division of work. Each task is specific and each employee only executes the missions he has been assigned. The work environment must be favorable for the employees to focus their attention only on their own activity. Operationally speaking, interactions between employees are more predictable because individuals behave in such a way as to meet the other's expectations. Employees meet in stable and familiar circumstances. Secondly, we must focus on channeling behaviors. The more routine the tasks are, the less the thinking is out of the frame of reference, which results in the production and careful selection of stimuli in order to focus the employee's attention and shape their behaviors. The third factor relates to the amount of information that is available to the individuals. Each employee is given information that interests him. Subordinates do not benefit from a global perspective so that their attention is directed towards their goals only. Indeed, if the framework is limited, then the courses of actions that can be considered while making a decision are also limited. Finally, one last important element is communication. One should favor a mainly quantitative piece of information rather than a qualitative one, preferably by transmitting the information through checkboxes and forms to fill out. Thus, this system avoids giving away the qualitative piece of information, and allows the latter to be more restricted and accurate at the bottom of the ladder, even though it was more balanced in higher hierarchical levels. Therefore, the information is simplified, standardized and oriented. The psychosociological approach. The psychosociological approach of decision-making is particular. Groups do not have the same characteristics as individuals, so there is a difference in the nature of the decisions in both situations. Therefore, as Janis showed in 1972, group decisions stem from groupthink and are irrational. They are actually an average decision or a compromise of everyone's opinion. This process, already described earlier, is called normalization. Moscovici explains that normalization allows us to follow the majority of opinions, and thus, the norm, which is one way to avoid conflict. Yet, the studies that Moscovici carried out show that normalization is not the only phenomenon at stake when group decisions are made. Sometimes, we can notice an extremization of group decisions compared to individual decisions. The opinion of a minority prevails. This is called polarization. Moscovici brought to light the risky shift. Groups have a tendency to make riskier decisions than individuals under certain circumstances. Factors influencing the decision's orientation are at the heart of the debate because the discussion allows people not to be inclined to make a uniform decision and to be aware that the solution they choose is the group's solution. The discussion enables the creation of new arguments. Otherwise, groups tend to go for socially valued arguments. But, if people discuss, exchange arguments and ideas, decisions tend to be more extreme. We also know that groups are good at innovating. Another factor influencing decision-making is the degree of involvement of individuals, that is to say their interest in the decision. We can easily imagine that if people are motivated and interested in the object of the decision, they make inquiries and participate more actively in the discussion. Other factors linked to the organization in space, in time and in the framework must also be considered. Formal and informal interactions. An informal meeting allows people to be more involved because rules do not apply here. It stresses the tendency to polarization. On the contrary, formal relationships lead to a restriction of social interactions, and so fewer conflicts and fewer discussions. Therefore, polarization decreases and gives way to compromise and average decisions. Hierarchy. The more authoritarian the leadership is, the less polarized the decisions are, since it leaves little room to discussion and debate. We will give further details on the importance of the different modes of supervision later on. The decision-making process, Moscovici, 1984, states that if the heavy decision-making procedures are neglected, space is organized in favor of discussion, and authority decreases so that decisions are more polarized and creative. Yulong's study focuses on the importance of the formality of decision-making. The experiment is organized as follows. Subjects must recommend a wise solution or a bold solution to Mr. X according to the classical experimental procedure. First, participants are asked to answer a questionnaire with a view to give advice to Mr. X individually. Secondly, they all get together with the instruction to search for a consensus on every point of the questionnaire. Finally, they are separated again to fill out the questionnaire one more time individually. Yulong also added some variants to this procedure. In the first situation, the attention of half of the groups was intentionally drawn to the procedure they were following to reach a consensus. They were asked, in addition to their answer, to analyze their decision-making process, and to write a report of the rules they had established in order to make decisions. The other half of the groups was not asked anything more than what was in the classical experimental procedure. The results showed that the groups in which interactions were formalized made less polarized decisions than the groups in which interactions had remained informal. In the second situation, another formal element had been integrated. One half of the groups had to make their decision in a 7-minute interval of time, and the other half did not have any time limit. The groups who had this restriction were more inclined to compromise than polarization. These various aspects of decision-making show how different the managerial approach and the psychosocial approach are, regarding both their problems and the kind of decisions that are valued. As far as strategic decisions are concerned, one might want to take advice from social psychology to make a decision, especially if one wants to innovate or be bold. It might be interesting to deepen our analysis of one important factor that we mentioned earlier, and that is developed in both approaches. The modes of supervision or types of leadership, which have a crucial impact on group decisions. Modes of supervision. Let's begin with a statement from March and Simon quoted by Rojo. They noticed that at the end of a peer meeting, no more alternative solutions are found than in a decision-making process with an authoritarian mode of supervision. Yet, intuitively one could think that an authoritarian leader would restrain the number of new ideas and that, on the contrary, a consultation among peers would encourage creativity. March and Simon explained this result by the cultural norm of independence, according to which the mere subordinate's participation in decision-making leads them to accept the authority and encourages them to comply with the company's expectations while being restricted to the thinking environment desired by the hierarchy. Consequently, the authors note that participative management enables a greater control on the decision from the hierarchy. The more the illusion of choice is present, the more the decisions made by subordinates will be in accordance with the hierarchy's expectations. The most important is the perceived participation, not the actual participation. When the perceived participation is increased, we can also notice that the values of the subordinates are in line with the hierarchies. This is the phenomenon of normalization that we mentioned earlier. Social psychology explains this phenomenon of normalization through the formal framework of meetings. Individuals comply with the company's standards and behave as they are expected to. According to Fisher, 2010, the type of leadership is directly linked to the decision-making process. There are two other essential factors, the communication structure and the kind of task. But we will not develop these two elements here. The type of leadership is a fundamental factor to be taken into consideration in decision-making. An experiment set by Lippitt and White in 1939 shows us the efficiency and quality of decision-making depending on the different types of leadership, authoritarian, democratic or laissez-faire. We will give details of this experiment to highlight the various behaviors resulting from these three types of leadership in a group. Thus, authors managed to make observations on three different levels: the socio-emotional atmosphere, the performances, and the cohesion of the group. In the first group, an authoritarian type of leader is present. Only he decides of the goals to be achieved, of how to achieve these goals, and of the actual task to be completed. The results show that this type of leader creates an apathetic atmosphere filled with an obvious hostility between the members of the group or towards external people. The performances of the group are satisfying and regular, but collapse as soon as the leader is gone. Thus, we notice that the group has very little cohesion. In the second group, the leader is democratic. He suggests certain means without imposing them, and negotiates a division of the roles with the members. The resulting socio-emotional atmosphere is good and the individuals are satisfied. Moreover, their performances are high, even when the leader is gone, since every member is involved. Finally, we can see in this case a strong cohesion in the group. In the third and last group, the type of leadership is called laissez-faire. The leader merges into the group as a member. He gives no instructions and let the individuals handle things among them in order to reach the required objective. The atmosphere is not the most favorable and is rather similar to the first group whose leader was authoritarian. This causes dissatisfaction for the members and a major lack of cohesion. The democratic type is the best to encourage and motivate the individuals. As March and Simon showed it, decisions made in such a way by the subordinates are part of the company's framework, and individuals are satisfied. For strategic decisions, if the democratic leader ensures an informal framework, neglects decision-making procedures and decreases the weight of hierarchy, decisions will be even more innovative. We have now seen how to react in case of decision-making. But what about bad decisions that have already been made? It seems relevant to ask ourselves the question of changing a decision, especially in the case of strategic decisions. Several examples show that people keep making mistakes. It is very hard to change a decision once it has been made, but psychosociologists study the topic and can give us some clarifications. To retain. If we consider different sectors in the business world, and apply to them what we have seen earlier, we can say that certain types of decisions should be made in one sector or another, and in one situation or another. Indeed, if we take the example of an innovative company such as Google, we can assume that, when they make a decision, members of the different groups will favor polarization. All ideas are worth listening to and considering, and with this state of mind, the company will tend towards a more original decision. On the other hand, for a company which works more conventionally and uses the normalization process more often to make choices, the decision that should come up will be an average of the opinions of the group members. If we take the example of lean management, we can clearly see that productivity is a central element, like many other companies for sure, but the means to get there are very specific to this type of supervision. Lean management tries to regulate everything by minimizing travels and waste as much as possible, but limits innovation and nonconformist decisions at the same time. Finally, Moscovici suggested 4 lines of recommendation to try to optimize decision-making. He maintained that variations of opinion have to be taken seriously and that disagreements between individuals will help develop the discussion. This allows people to highlight judgments and opinions which lead to new arguments that they did not think about in the first place. Secondly, Moscovici thought that techniques which aim at setting boundaries to human relationships, such as allocated time or procedural rules, have to be banned. Besides, according to him, One has to give the opportunity to everyone to firmly defend their point of view. He even thought that coming to a consensus and a decision too quickly is weird. If this is the case, it might be a good idea to ask oneself if the decision is relevant and if all members really agree with it. His last piece of advice focuses on avoiding the use of stereotypes, of preconceived solutions, and maintains that arguments from authority should be banned. Of course, these recommendations are ideal. According to the situation of the company and circumstances, the members of a group are not always willing to listen to everybody's opinion, or it can be difficult to maintain optimal conditions to make a good decision, etc.